I want to tell you about when I saw a person get taken over by a demonic force and become captive to do that power's will against me. Something that a third party would actually fill me in on the details later on. Now, this happened September 12th, 1982. I was in my early 20s, and I had decided that day to get for my female Shetland sheepdog a companion. The problem is that there was 2 different people advertising puppies at the time, and they were priced between $150 and $175, and I only had $50. So I got the idea to use a contract I had gotten printed out of a magazine called Dog World magazine, which I had used to sell puppies of my own a few years back, where I would let people get them on time payments. And I said, well, I would just go to one of these sellers and see if they would agree to this. I would put $50 down, and then I would pay $50 a month, because I was working at the time at a hospital part-time, and I was making $6 an hour, and I only worked 20 hours a week. So I took off on this warm, sunny South Florida day in my 1972 Chevy Impala. It was faded green. And I went off to the breeder that was south. It was about a half an hour drive. And I had my windows down because I had no air conditioning in my car. And it was warm. So I came to the house, and it was a modest-sized house, typical ranch-style house. And when I knocked on the door, they were expecting me because I had telephoned before. And they opened the door, and immediately the house led into the kitchen. And the wife was there, and the husband came in. He was kind of gruff. He was leading the puppies, and when I saw the puppies, inwardly I was shocked, because my dog China, she was the daughter of a champion line, and so she was perfect to the breed. She was the size that a Shetland sheepdog is supposed to be, but these puppies, they dwarfed her. They were puppy mill Shetland sheepdogs. I could tell that they were puppy mill breeders that just bred to sell. Didn't bother to conform to the breed. But, I was a beggar, and a beggar can't be choosy. So I went ahead and I presented my offer. Well, the husband, he got immediately angry. I mean, he was angry. And the wife, I could tell she was embarrassed by his behavior. And he declined. So this is the day when there was no cell phones, and the other breeder was across the town. So before I would drive over there, I asked the people if I could use their phone, because I was up front with them. I wanted to call the other breeder available to me to see if they were there and if they had puppies, and then I would go from there. So I called up the other breeder. It was a woman picked up, and she told me, yes, they had a puppy, and they would be waiting for me. And the husband and wife stood there listening to me. And when I hung up the telephone, I thanked them. And then I went outside, and the husband followed me on the porch, and I thought he was being courteous. I had my Chevy Impala. I had parked it sideways to the house. It was just a small front yard. And when I got into the car, I went to turn to look at the man where I was sitting in the driver's seat, just to wave goodbye. And what I saw next surprised me. His eyes filled with a yellow light, yellow, malicious, evil light. If it covered his eyes, I could not see the pupil. I couldn't see his eyes. It completely filled his eyes. Now you have to understand, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was in Miami, Florida, a little bit south, an area called Perrine. It was broad daylight. There was no trees. You take a flashlight, you turn it on in broad daylight, you can't even tell that the flashlight is on. But yet, here I saw his eyes his eyes in a way had disappeared. They had become overcome with this malicious, evil light. But it went further than that. They shot out like a Transformer movie. They went out in strong beams from his eyes. And I was looking at him, and I thought to myself, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And I didn't know what to make of it, because he was about 20 feet to my left, plainest view. And one moment the man himself was looking at me, and the next moment his eyes were overcome with this malicious yellow evil light, and they shot out in beams that were like a special effect movie. But I didn't know what to make of it. I did not know what to make of it. Just that some kind of malicious evil had overcome him. But I was to find out. I was to find out a few hours later on what that was about. So I left. I drove across town, and I came to the apartment on the second floor, where this other couple, other husband and wife, were waiting for me. And I knocked on the door. They let me in, and they showed me the only puppy they had left. He was actually a runt of the litter. And I thought he was just wonderful. And I fell in love with him right then. And then I went again, and I told them, that I only had $50, but I was willing, and if they were okay with it, to be able to pay them $50 a month. And I had this contract that I had gotten from Dog World. If would they want to do it? Well, they agreed. They immediately agreed, and I gave them the $50, signed the contract, and I left. And I'm showing here a picture of my puppy on that very day. I named him Chinling, which is the highest mountain in China. And I wanted him to become the highest mountain in my dog's heart. So, to my surprise, later that evening, I received a phone call from the wife of the second couple, the woman. She called me up. Now, this is the old days when the phones were attached to the walls, and I had to go into my parents' room to receive the call. And I sat there, and she'd gotten my phone off the contract. She called me. Her first name was Linda. I'm not going to say her last name because, I wanted to protect her privacy. But this Linda, she telephoned me to tell me what would be the reason why I saw that light in that man's eye, why I saw that evil in that man's eye. She said to me, she wanted to tell me that before I came, their phone had rang, and it was a man, and he had said he was Mr. Burke from the AKC, the American Kennel Club, which is the association in the United States that heads all the breeds of dogs, the American Kennel Club. He said he was Mr. Burke from the AKC, and he was calling to warn her that there was a woman going around with a contract, and she would use it to say she would buy puppies, and then she would not pay, and she had made off with many puppies that way. Well, when he hung up, she actually worked as a police dispatcher, and she had used what she told me was called a Bressler directory. She had found his number, and she had telephoned back, and she found it was the same phone as the other breeder in the newspaper, because I found both of the breeders in the Miami Herald classified section. And when she called, the same man who had said he was Mr. Burke answered the telephone. So when she had called that number, the voice that answered was the same man who had just called her to tell her he was from the AKC. So when she hung up, I had yet to be there. She talked it over with her husband, and they had decided to wait to see when I came they would make up their own mind. And she told me that when I had come in, she immediately knew that that man had been lying. She told me that later on when I had left, she had telephoned him, and she had told him she worked for the police department, and she was going to file charges against him for fraud and lying. A few weeks later, I got a letter from her, and she had told me that she had written a letter to the American Kennel Club, 4 pages, and she was reporting him because he was representing himself as an officer of the American Kennel Club and going around spreading this falsehood, and she wanted to pursue this. But after she had written that 4-page letter, her husband had advised her that they wished to have concrete evidence, and without it, she may herself get sued for libel. So all she could do was just report it, and I remember I had gotten a visit from the American Kennel Club to ask questions about this fellow. So she wanted, though, to have him put away for being such a mean creep, she had said. So as you can see, this behavior by this fellow was extraordinary, out of the ordinary, malicious, and evil. In fact, to a stranger who had not met me, he had been so out of place in his plot and evil against me, a stranger he himself had just met. He had gone to such an extreme, he had acted with such deviousness that the person of the third party, an independent person, had become incensed, had found him to be a creep, a mean creep. You know, some people are just creeps, as that lady had said. But when I think back to how a critical role that Chinling had played in my life, I had gone through some really hard times after then, that there were times that he was the only reason that I had wanted to live. So I can now look back and see that the demonic forces wanted to prevent me from getting this little puppy that would keep my will to go in dark hours, help me to get past times. And I always remember how every time I looked at him, he seemed utterly perfect. So the Spirit of the Lord had been working through that little dog, because I found him so perfect and so delightful to look at. And I'm sharing here a couple pictures with him when he was growing up, and you can see how much I loved him, and it was a special bond. So because of that, I became convinced that that evil glow that I saw come out of that man's eyes was the demonic forces that wanted to keep me from having such a life-saving companion. Now, in that time, that was the first time that I had seen a human being get taken over by a demonic power. Just like the scripture says, just like 2 Timothy 2:26 says, he became captive. He was captive to do the enemy's will. And he was. I saw him become captive to this force. And then that force took him on a mission. As that force got him incensed, that force took that rage and took that man back in the house and led him to go through a evil deed in order to try to prevent me from having that really important pet for me in my life. What I also saw was there was some kind of legal right that existed in that man, that the demonic could take him over. First of all, he had some kind of a rage problem in the first place that his wife was embarrassed about. And I recollect that there was some beer that he had been drinking, so perhaps maybe he even had a problem of alcoholism. So there existed in him a legal right that the enemy could take him over at will. It's just like the scripture John 14:30, where Jesus said that he couldn't speak any much longer because the prince of this world was coming and he had no claim on him. See, the Lord was without sin, so the devil had no legal claim to him. But this man that I had seen, in the brief time, I could see he had a temper problem. I could see it was something so bad that the wife, she was embarrassed about his temper. She was embarrassed about his behavior. Now, since that time, since I actually witnessed the process, and I'm telling you, it was broad daylight. It was really important about this, because a lot of the stories you hear on YouTube that happen to the people when they're out of body, it's as a result of they die, through some kind of trauma. It can be a head trauma, it can be drug overdose. So you're wondering about, when do they really see these things? But I was the furthest thing from my mind. I was a young woman. I was awake, and it was broad daylight. It was outdoors, and I saw this happen. And the third party would then call me to let me in what was going on, herself not even knowing that at that point that man had been taken over by a demonic force, driven to do wickedness against me in order to keep that person from allowing me to have a dog that would be a crucial pet in my life, that would be the only reason sometimes I wanted to live. And that taught me. I got to see it. So that as the years went by, I came into other experiences where people would have that trait of a demon pawn. Now, I didn't know anything that people called them agents of the enemy, agents of the devil, because I had not been in a church that spoke of such things. I was Catholic at the time. It was only much later on that I learned some people call people who are doing the will of the devil as agents of the enemy. But as I saw it, this man was really more like 2 Timothy 2:26. He was a captive of the enemy. He became captive in order to do the will of the devil. It was like he was taken over. And this demonic force literally could move this man around like a puppet to do his will. He would influence the man's heart, give him the ideas, give him the information to call. And so he did the whole thing. He gave out this whole plan. And he was determined. He was obsessed. And it led me to learn that there are 3 kinds of demon pawns. The first kind is the kind of, in Matthew, where Apostle Peter, temporarily, not having any legal entryway, he accepted an influence of the enemy to deliver a message to Jesus that was against the plan of God. And that's where the Lord Jesus told him, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now that's the first kind. The first kind that really can be a Christian, can be great in the faith, and they receive a dart of the enemy to say a message that they're not being evil in themselves about it, but they're just relating the influence that the enemy did that actually turns out to be against the plan of God. The second kind is like what I saw in that man. He had some kind of legal entryway that he could just be taken over. And he was led to do everything that the enemy wanted him to do. He was a literal pawn. He was captive. He may have thought this was all his doing, but I saw him getting taken over, and then he went to do something that was outrageous and just totally evil. The third type of demon pawn is the willing one. They're actually involved in some type of satanic matters, and they're doing this willingly. Now, there are actually people who are even in high places now that are willing agents. These I call agents of the devil, because they are willingly doing it. They're not being manipulated by the enemy. They by choice are doing it under the false assumption that they're going to get some reward from the devil one day, and all they're going to get is the same thing that everyone else gets from the devil. It's a deception. So how do you know when you're facing any type of these three demon pawns? Well, the first one, of course, can just be anyone. You know, even a person who is a very devout Christian can, if they're not careful, accept the dart of the enemy and repeat that. That's actually against the plan of God. That's usually just temporary, and it may never happen again. It can happen to any of us if we're not careful. But the other two will have a specific hallmark of behavior towards you that is, without any kind of cause or justification, extremely hostile to you. They will seek to do things that are just sinister and evil, and just pretty much showing the agenda of the enemy, which is to steal, kill, and destroy. Now really, for those, and really all three, but especially the last two, you really should lift prayers, because, you know, the Lord died on the cross for those people too, and really there are victims of the enemy. Whether they realize it or not, they're victims. But it's particularly the last two, you should not try to reason or rationalize with them, because a person who is under the influence of the enemy, you can't reach them. All you're doing is talking to that demon that's controlling them, and you're not going to get any agreement with the demon. You know, it happened over 30 some years ago. Okay, it sounds a long time, especially for people who were 20. But I can remember it as if it was yesterday, because this is very unusual. It was very unusual to see this. It was really unexpected, and the fact that it happened in broad daylight, to see this movie effect come out of a person's eyes, and then you find out later on that what looked like a demon possession actually is because they went on to go to attempt to do an evil deed against you. These things are real. The things that you read in the Bible, that people are captured by the devil to do his will, it's not a literary comparison. It's a literal act. I'll witness one person literally been captured to do the will of the enemy at that point and carry it out. Carry it out. And it's so interesting. I'm so glad that the Lord moved that lady to call me, because if that woman had not called me back, it had impressed her so much that she had called me back, and then she had told me the details behind the scenes. She had waited for me to come. They had waited to judge themselves about me, her husband and her. They had then decided that guy was lying as soon as I came in the door. She knew I had been lying. And she couldn't hold herself, I guess, and she had called me to tell me. She didn't have to. She had never called me. I never would have known anything more than I saw this guy have this experience, not knowing everything he would then follow to do. Everything he would then follow to do. And you see, what the Lord talks about in the Bible, and how they cast demons out of people that were what we consider mentally ill. The men who were going through the graveyards that were demon possessed. The other fellow that was so full of demons that they had him chained, and he would just be cutting himself and just howling. Well, today they reject that. They reject it totally. They call it mental illness, and they treat it by drugging the person. Well, the only thing they're accomplishing is drugging the body, but they are not getting rid of the demons. So I want to share that with you, so you can have confirmation from a person who went through it in regular daylight that people get taken over by devils is true. It's utterly true. My gosh, I saw this happen when someone was taken over by the enemy to try to thwart me from having a precious pet. An animal that would become a precious pet, like I said, so precious that he actually was the only reason, and in the hardship I was to go through, that I wanted to keep living. That's it. I wanted to keep living at that times, just because of my love with that animal. My love with that dog kept me going. Satan, he's not confined to hell. We know from the Bible that he's able to come before God and accuse the brethren. So he can have privy, he can have understanding of some of the plans in our lives, some of the plans. And so probably it was seen that I would get into depression over certain things, and that dog was what would keep me going. And they wanted then to prevent me from having that dog. Perhaps even to the point they could see in the future what I'd be doing, where I would become born again, and they wanted to keep me from getting born again. And if I hadn't had that dog, I may have taken my life. I may have taken my life. So I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to share the story. Demons are real. The Bible stories about people being possessed by demons is true. It happens today. It's the same today as it was in those days. These things did not stop back then. And there's lessons to learn. What I came away with that was knowing how to identify a demon pawn. I now know when I'm dealing with demon pawns. I've had, since I got to see for myself, I got the confidence to understand the phenomenon. And so it has helped me to deal with people who I have met since then, who themselves were behaving like demon pawns, and get through it, understanding that they're under the influence of the enemy.